The windshield wipers slapped rhythmically against the rain as Sarah Mitchell navigated her silver Honda Civic through the dark Columbus streets. It was 9:47 p.m. on Friday, November 15th, 2019, and the November storm had turned the roads into reflective black mirrors. Sarah hummed along to an old Taylor Swift song on the radio, her mind still buzzing from the parent-teacher conferences that had just ended. "Mrs. Mitchell, Tommy is reading 2 grade levels ahead now," one parent had gushed. Those moments made everything worthwhile: the early mornings, the stack of papers to grade, the modest teacher's salary. At 34, Sarah had found her calling. Teaching 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary wasn't just a job, it was her passion. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, lit up with a text from David. "Girls are asleep. Made your favorite pasta. Drive safe, the roads look bad. Love you, Red." Sarah smiled and tapped the voice reply. "Almost home. Can't wait, love you too." Just 15 more minutes and she'd be home. She could already picture it, kicking off her heels, curling up on the couch with David, maybe half watching a movie while she decompressed from the long week. Tomorrow was Saturday. She'd promised Emma and Grace they could bake cookies and work on their art project. The traffic light at the Route 23 intersection glowed red ahead. Sarah slowed to a stop, first in line. The rain intensified, drumming louder on the roof. She glanced at the digital clock, 9:51 p.m. Through the blurred windshield, she could barely see the closed gas station on the corner and the empty parking lot of a shuttered restaurant. This intersection always felt isolated at night, too far from the main commercial district, too industrial. During the day, trucks rumbled through constantly, but at night it became a ghost town. Sarah was completely alone at the light, her headlights cutting through sheets of rain. She thought about her lesson plans for Monday. They were starting a unit on Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. She prepared a special activity where students would write about times they'd shown courage. 8-year-olds had such pure hearts. Their answers always surprised her. The light turned green. Sarah checked both ways, a habit drilled into her by her late father, a highway patrol officer who'd seen too many accidents. The left was clear. The right was clear. She pressed the gas pedal and moved forward into the intersection. That's when she saw it. Headlights coming from her right, fast, way too fast. Time became elastic, stretching like taffy. Sarah's brain processed everything in fragmented snapshots. Black SUV, not slowing, not stopping, massive, close, too close, no time to. Her foot slammed the brake pedal, but it was pointless. She was already in the intersection. The SUV was already there. The impact was apocalyptic. The SUV's front end collided with Sarah's driver's side door at 55 miles per hour. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a thunderous crunch of metal compacting, glass exploding, physics asserting its brutal laws. Her car spun like a toy, rotating 180 degrees. The airbag detonated into her face with the force of a bomb. Her head snapped sideways against the window with a sickening crack. The world became a violent kaleidoscope, spinning lights, broken glass raining like diamonds, the acrid smell of deployed airbags, a high-pitched ringing in her ears that drowned out everything else. Then her car stopped spinning. It rested against a telephone pole, the entire driver's side crumpled like tinfoil. Steam hissed from the destroyed engine. The radio was still playing, somehow, Taylor Swift's voice now eerily cheerful against the carnage. Sarah tried to move, couldn't, tried to scream. Nothing came out. She tasted copper, blood filling her mouth. Her vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. The pain hadn't registered yet, her body was in shock. Through her shattered window she saw a figure emerge from the SUV. A man stumbling, holding his head. He pulled out a phone, paced in circles, seemed to be yelling something. Sarah couldn't hear, couldn't process, couldn't think. Her last conscious thought was of Emma and Grace, 7 and 5 years old, their faces, their laughs, their bedtime routine. "One more story, Mama, please." Who would read them stories now? The darkness swallowed her whole. 6 minutes later, Fire Engine 17 screamed onto the scene, followed by 2 ambulances and 3 police cruisers. Paramedic James Chen, no relation to the driver, ran to Sarah's crumpled vehicle and immediately called for the jaws of life. She was unconscious, barely breathing, her pulse thready and weak. Female, mid-30s, severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding, he radioed to the hospital. We need to move fast. It took firefighters 11 minutes to cut Sarah free from the wreckage. They placed a cervical collar around her neck and carefully transferred her to a backboard. Her purse had spilled across the passenger seat, wallet, keys, and a student's drawing that read, "You're the best teacher ever," with a crayon rainbow. As the ambulance raced toward Ohio State University Medical Center, sirens wailing, James worked frantically to keep Sarah alive. Her blood pressure was dropping. Her breathing was irregular. "Stay with me," he whispered, squeezing a breathing bag. "Stay with me." 3 miles away, David Mitchell sat on the couch, watching the news and wondering why Sarah hadn't texted that she was close. Their pasta was getting cold. He wasn't worried yet. Sometimes conferences ran late when parents wanted to chat. He had no idea that at that exact moment, in an operating room at OSU Medical Center, surgeons were drilling into his wife's skull to relieve the massive brain bleed that was killing her. He had no idea that the drunk driver who'd caused the crash was, at that same moment, being handcuffed and read his rights while he slurred excuses about only 2 drinks. He had no idea that his entire world had just shattered like Sarah's windshield, into 1,000 pieces that would never quite fit back together the same way. At 11:03 p.m. David's phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Ohio State Medical Center. There's been an accident." David Mitchell's hands shook so violently that he could barely grip the steering wheel. He'd thrown on shoes without socks, grabbed his keys, and run out the door, leaving Emma and Grace asleep in their beds. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had rushed over in her bathrobe when he'd pounded on her door at 11:07 p.m., incoherent and terrified. "Watch the girls," he'd gasped. "Sarah accident hospital." Now he was speeding through the same rain that had fallen when his wife's car was destroyed, his mind refusing to accept what the nurse had told him on the phone. Critical condition. Severe traumatic brain injury. You need to come immediately. The fluorescent lights of Ohio State University Medical Center's emergency entrance blurred through his tears. David abandoned his car in a no-parking zone and sprinted through the automatic doors. A nurse at the desk looked up, startled. "Sarah Mitchell, my wife, where is she?" The nurse's expression shifted to practice sympathy. David's stomach dropped. That look, he knew that look. "Sir, let me page Dr. Rawlings. Please have a seat." "I don't want to sit. Where is my wife?" Within minutes, Dr. Michael Rawlings appeared, still in surgical scrubs splattered with blood. Sarah's blood. David's knees nearly buckled. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm the neurosurgeon who operated on your wife. Let's talk in the consultation room." "Just tell me, is she alive?" Dr. Rawlings guided him gently but firmly down a corridor into a small, sterile room with a box of tissues on the table. That's when David knew it was bad. Really bad. "Your wife is alive, but her injuries are severe. The impact caused a massive epidural hematoma, bleeding between her skull and brain. We performed an emergency craniotomy to relieve the pressure and stop the bleeding. We saved her life, but—" "But what?" David's voice cracked. "The brain trauma is extensive, particularly to the left hemisphere. That's the area that controls language, speech, and communication. She's in a medically induced coma right now to let her brain rest and reduce swelling. The next 72 hours are critical." David couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Will she wake up? Dr. Rawlings chose his words carefully. "We don't know, And if she does wake up, we can't predict what level of function she'll have. Brain injuries are unpredictable. Every case is different. What does that mean, function? She may have difficulty with movement, memory, cognition. Given the location of the damage, speech and language will almost certainly be affected. But Mr. Mitchell, let's take this one step at a time. Right now, we focus on getting her through the next 3 days. They let him see her at 1:30 a.m. Nothing could have prepared David for the sight of his vibrant, beautiful wife lying motionless in the ICU bed, her head wrapped in bandages, a ventilator tube down her throat, machines beeping and hissing around her. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, bruised purple and yellow. Dried blood crusted around her hairline where they'd cut into her skull. "Sarah," he whispered, taking her cold hand. "Baby, I'm here, I'm right here." No response, just the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator breathing for her. David collapsed into the chair beside her bed and wept. The next 3 days became an eternity of terror. David never left the ICU waiting room except to see Sarah during visiting hours. He called into his job at the accounting firm, family emergency, indefinite leave. His brother flew in from Detroit to help with Emma and Grace. David couldn't bear to bring them to the hospital yet. How do you explain to a 7-year-old and 5-year-old that mommy might die, that mommy might never be mommy again? On day 2, a police detective named Ray Martinez visited. He was in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm deeply sorry about your wife. I'm investigating the crash. I need to ask you some questions when you're ready." David was hollow, operating on no sleep and hospital coffee. "What happened?" They said a drunk driver. Martinez's jaw tightened. Marcus Chen, 28 years old, pharmaceutical sales rep. He ran a red light at 55 in a 35 zone. Blood alcohol 0.12 plus prescription Xanax in his system. We have him on surveillance footage, clear as day. The rage hit David like a physical blow. He was drunk and on pills. "Yes, sir. He's been charged with aggravated vehicular assault and DUI. He made bail yesterday." "He's out." David stood up, his voice rising. "That man nearly killed my wife and he's out." "I know it's not fair, Mr. Mitchell. I've been doing this 23 years and it never gets easier. But I promise you we're building an airtight case. He will face justice." After Martinez left, David sat in the chapel on the 3rd floor and screamed into his hands. A drunk driver, some careless, selfish person who couldn't call an Uber, had destroyed his entire life. Sarah had done everything right, driven carefully, stopped at the light, checked both ways, and it didn't matter. One person's choice had erased everything. On day 4, the doctors began reducing Sarah's sedation. "We need to see if she can breathe on her own," Dr. Rawlings explained. David held his breath as they removed the ventilator tube. Sarah gasped, coughed, her body convulsing, but she was breathing on her own. "Good," Dr. Rawlings nodded. "That's very good." But she didn't wake up. Days 5, 6, 7 crawled by. David read to her from her favorite book, The Great Gatsby. He played music, Fleetwood Mac, The Beatles, Taylor Swift. He brought Emma's drawing from school, Get Well Soon Mommy, with wobbly hearts. He talked until his voice was hoarse, telling her about the girls, about the neighbors bringing casseroles, about the students from her class who'd made a giant card. "You have to come back to us, Sarah, please. The girls need their mom, I need my wife. Please, baby, please wake up." Nothing. On day 15, David's hope began to die. The nurses avoided eye contact. The neurologist used words like persistent vegetative state and long-term care facilities. On day 20, David brought Emma and Grace to visit. They needed to see their mother even like this. Emma held Sarah's hand and sang Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, their bedtime song. Grace put her favorite stuffed bunny on Sarah's pillow. Both girls cried softly. "When will Mommy wake up, Daddy?" Grace asked. David couldn't answer. He just held them tight. On day 23, a nurse named Patricia was adjusting Sarah's IV when she noticed something. "Mr. Mitchell, her hand, did you see that?" David looked up from his phone where he'd been mindlessly scrolling. "What?" Her finger moved. "I swear I saw it twitch." They watched frozen. Then there, Sarah's right index finger flexed slightly. Sarah, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." David grabbed her hand. Nothing, then a weak squeeze, barely perceptible but there. She squeezed my hand. "Doctor, someone get the doctor." On day 24 at 6:42 a.m., Sarah Mitchell's eyes opened. David was asleep in the chair, his head on her bed when he felt movement. He jolted awake to find his wife staring at the ceiling, confused and terrified, trying to pull at her IV lines. "Sarah, oh my God, Sarah, nurse, she's awake, she's awake." The room filled with medical staff. They shined lights in her eyes, asked her questions, ran tests. Sarah's eyes darted around wildly, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to speak but couldn't remember how. Dr. Rawlings came in, examined her carefully, then asked David to step outside. "Mr. Mitchell, your wife is awake, which is wonderful news. But I need you to understand, the Sarah you knew before the accident may not be the Sarah who came back to you. The brain damage is significant. We'll need extensive testing to understand the full scope of her deficits." "But she's alive, she's awake." "Yes, but this is just the beginning of a very long, very difficult journey." Dr. Rawlings didn't know how right he was. When they finally let David back in the room, he pulled a chair close to Sarah's bed and took her hand. Her eyes found his face, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "Hi, baby," David whispered. "Welcome back, I love you so much." Sarah's mouth opened. She struggled, her face contorting with effort. Finally, a sound emerged, garbled, slurred, barely recognizable. "Daya." She was trying to say his name, but she couldn't. And in that moment, David understood the nightmare was far from over. It was only beginning. Detective Ray Martinez sat in the dimly lit interrogation room at Columbus Police Department's Central Station, watching Marcus Chen through the one-way mirror. The 28-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative looked remarkably composed for someone who'd nearly killed a woman just 18 hours ago. He wore an expensive Navy suit, Tom Ford, Martinez guessed, and checked his Rolex every few minutes. His attorney, Jonathan Reeves, sat beside him, equally polished in his $3,000 tailored ensemble. Martinez had been a cop for 23 years. He'd developed an instinct about people, and everything about Marcus Chen screamed entitlement. Martinez entered the room and sat down heavily, placing a thick file folder on the table. "Mr. Chen, let's go over this one more time." Marcus leaned forward, his expression practiced and earnest. "Detective, like I told the officers at the scene, I had dinner with clients at Morton's Steakhouse. I had maybe 2 drinks, 3 at most. I remember the light being yellow when I entered the intersection. It happened so fast." "Yellow?" Martinez opened the folder and slid a still image from the surveillance footage across the table. "This is from the gas station camera at the intersection. Timestamp, 9:51:37 p.m. See that traffic light, Mr. Chen? That's red, bright red. And here's your SUV." He tapped another photo, not even slowing down. Jonathan Reeves interjected smoothly. "Visibility was poor due to heavy rain. The timestamp could be off." Martinez ignored him and pulled out another document. "This is your credit card receipt from Morton's. 6 drinks, Mr. Chen. 6 Jack Daniels neat. $84 in alcohol alone. Between 6:30 p.m. and 9:15 p.m. Marcus's confident mask slipped for just a moment. Those weren't all for me. I was buying rounds for clients." "Really? Because I spoke with your clients, Richard Tomlin and Susan Park from Mercy Hospital's procurement department. They both said they each had 1 glass of wine with dinner and left at 8:00 p.m. They said you stayed at the bar, alone, for another hour and 15 minutes. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Martinez leaned in closer. Your blood alcohol was 0.12, Mr. Chen. The legal limit is 0.08. You also had Xanax in your system. Did you mention that? Mixing alcohol with benzodiazepines. You weren't impaired. You were wrecked. And you got behind the wheel of a 5,000-pound vehicle and ran a red light at 55 miles per hour in a 35 zone. My client has cooperated fully, Reeves began. Your client put a 34-year-old school teacher in a coma. Martinez slammed his hand on the table. She has 2 little girls who don't know if their mother will ever be the same again. Mr. Chen here. He walked away with a bruised shoulder. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his polished exterior cracking. I feel terrible about this. I really do. It was an accident. No, Martinez's voice was ice. An accident is a tire blowout, a deer in the road. This was a choice. You chose to get drunk. You chose to pop pills. You chose to drive. Every single decision led to that intersection, and Sarah Mitchell paid the price. 3 weeks later, while Sarah lay fighting for her life in the ICU, Marcus Chen was released on $50,000 bail, pocket change for his pharmaceutical executive father who'd wired the money within an hour. Marcus returned to his downtown Columbus loft, ankle monitor secured, awaiting trial. His company, MedTech Solutions, had placed him on administrative leave, corporate speak for "we're distancing ourselves until this blows over." His girlfriend, Ashley, had broken up with him via text. I can't be with someone who did this. Don't contact me. Marcus poured himself a sparkling water, no alcohol per his bail conditions, and stared out at the city skyline. His attorney had been clear. Show remorse, complete an alcohol treatment program, stay out of trouble, and they might get this down to a lesser charge. First-time offender, successful career, no priors, Reeves had said. We can work with this. The prosecution will want to make an example of you, but juries are sympathetic to rehabilitation narratives. Marcus enrolled in an intensive outpatient treatment program at Riverside Recovery Center. 3 times a week, he sat in a circle with other DUI offenders and talked about his journey. I've learned so much about myself, he'd say, using the therapeutic language the counselors liked. I was using alcohol to cope with work stress. I've identified my triggers. I'm committed to making better choices. But late at night, alone in his loft, Marcus Googled Sarah Mitchell obsessively. He found her Facebook page, photos of her with her husband and 2 little girls, pictures from her classroom, posts about books and teaching. In one photo, she was reading to a circle of students, her face animated and joyful. The guilt would hit him in waves, crushing and nauseating. He'd caused this. He'd destroyed this woman's life, this family's life. Some nights he'd cry. Other nights he'd rage at himself, punching walls until his knuckles bled. But then morning would come and his survival instinct would kick back in. His attorney had a strategy. He had a chance. 8 years in prison versus probation and community service. The difference was everything. 4 months after the crash, Detective Martinez built his case meticulously. He interviewed the bartender at Morton's, who remembered Marcus clearly. Cocky guy, kept ordering doubles, talking loudly about his sales commissions. I should have cut him off, but he seemed fine. They always seem fine until they're not. Martinez obtained Marcus's cell phone records. At 9:48 p.m., 3 minutes before the crash, Marcus had been texting his friend, "Dude, I'm so wasted, lol, heading home." That text would become Prosecution Exhibit A. Martinez also tracked down the gas station security footage that showed Marcus stumbling from his vehicle after the crash, looking around frantically, then rehearsing what appeared to be his story, gesturing at the traffic light, shaking his head as if confused. The case was airtight. Marcus Chen was going to trial. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell's world had become a prison of her own body. 6 months post-crash, she'd been transferred from ICU to a rehabilitation facility, then finally home with round-the-clock nursing care. Her physical injuries had healed, the skull fracture, the broken ribs, the internal bleeding all resolved. But her brain was broken. Dr. Linda Pearson, her speech therapist, visited 3 times a week. They worked on basic exercises, forming sounds, connecting words to objects, building simple sentences. Say water, Sarah, water. Sarah's face contorted with effort. Ta. Close, so close, but not right. Emma and Grace would sit on the couch, watching their mother struggle to say their names. Emma had started wetting the bed again. Grace had stopped talking at school. The trauma was cascading through the entire family. David had burned through their savings, $127,000 in medical bills not covered by insurance. He'd taken a second job doing weekend tax preparation. His hair had gone gray seemingly overnight. He was 39 but looked 55. And through it all, Sarah's rage grew. She'd see Marcus Chen's face on the news, his attorney making statements about rehabilitation and one mistake. And she'd scream, wordless and inarticulate, her fury trapped inside her damaged brain. One night Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook trying to write down her thoughts. Her hand shook as she gripped the pen. She wanted to write, "I hate him. I hate Marcus Chen. He stole my life." What came out, "I've had, he stole." She threw the notebook across the room and sobbed. David found her 20 minutes later, still crying, and held her as she shook. "We'll get justice," he promised. "The trial is in 3 months. He will pay for this." But what payment could ever be enough? Sarah looked at her husband, struggling to form the words burning in her chest. Finally, painfully, she managed to, "Not fair." It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. And Marcus Chen, sitting in his loft with his ankle monitor and his court-ordered therapy sessions, had no idea that in 4 months he'd stand in a courtroom and face the full weight of what he'd done. He had no idea that 2 words would change everything. Sarah Mitchell woke up at 6:17 a.m. like she did every morning from a nightmare where she could speak. In the dream, she was back in her classroom, reading Charlotte's Web to her 3rd graders, her voice clear and strong. Then she'd wake up, and the crushing reality would slam into her chest like that SUV all over again. She couldn't speak. She could barely make sounds. Beside her, David was already gone, off to his morning shift at the accounting firm before his evening job at H&R Block. The bed was empty and cold. Sarah lay there, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her temples into her hair. This was her life now. This silent, frustrating, humiliating existence. At 9:00 a.m., her home health aide Maria arrived. "Good morning, Sarah. Ready for breakfast?" Sarah nodded. She hated how people spoke to her now, with that bright, artificially cheerful tone reserved for children and invalids. She was 34 years old, not a toddler, but she couldn't tell them that. She couldn't tell them anything. Maria prepared oatmeal and cut up strawberries while chattering about her grandson's baseball game. Sarah sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, the same ones she'd worn for 3 days because getting dressed felt pointless, and tried to eat. Even swallowing was difficult now. The brain injury had affected everything. On the refrigerator hung Emma's spelling test, 100% with a gold star. Next to it, Grace's finger painting, a family with 4 stick figures, Mommy, Daddy, Emma, Grace, written in crooked letters. Sarah stared at it and felt her throat close up. Grace had drawn Mommy with a big smile. Sarah hadn't really smiled in 8 months. At 10:00 a.m., Dr. Linda Pearson arrived for speech therapy. Sarah both dreaded and desperately needed these sessions. Linda was kind, patient, and relentlessly optimistic, everything Sarah couldn't be anymore. "Good morning, Sarah. Linda set up her materials on the dining room table: flashcards, picture books, a mirror, recording equipment. "How are we feeling today?" Sarah shrugged. She had about 15 words she could reliably say, all mangled and slurred. Yes, no, hurt, tired, help, sorry. That last one came out most often. Sorry for being broken. Sorry for being a burden. Sorry for existing. "Okay, let's warm up. Watch my mouth." Linda exaggerated her lip movements. MMMMM, mommy, can you try?" Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror Linda held up. She focused intensely, trying to make her brain send the right signals to her mouth. MMMM, ma. Good, keep going, mummy. Maya, aha. Frustration exploded out of Sarah. She slammed her hand on the table, making the flashcards jump. It's okay, Linda soothed. This is hard work. Your brain is literally rewiring itself. Every attempt is progress, even the unsuccessful ones. But Sarah didn't want participation trophies. She wanted her voice back. She wanted to call her daughters by their names. She wanted to tell her husband she loved him without it sounding like a dying animal's grunt. She wanted to scream at Marcus Chen, to tell him exactly what he'd stolen from her. They worked for 90 minutes. By the end, Sarah was exhausted, sweating, her head pounding. She'd successfully said cup and more and something that vaguely resembled hungry. Linda recorded it all, showing Sarah the progress graphs. "See, 8 months ago you had 0 words. Now you have 17. That's incredible, Sarah." 17 words. A 3-year-old had more vocabulary than she did. After Linda left, Sarah sat alone in the living room and opened her laptop, the one thing she could still do somewhat competently. Her typing was slow, hunt and peck style, because the brain injury had affected her fine motor skills too. But she could communicate this way. Sort of. She pulled up Facebook, something she rarely did anymore. Seeing everyone's normal lives, friends taking vacations, former colleagues posting classroom photos, parents sharing their kids' achievements was torture. Her own page had become a graveyard. The last post before the accident, first snow of the year, hot cocoa and holiday movies with my favorite people read. That Sarah felt like a different person, a ghost. Now her page was full of well-meaning comments from people she barely knew, praying for you, stay strong, you're such an inspiration. They meant well, but Sarah wasn't inspirational. She was broken. There was nothing inspiring about crying because you couldn't ask for a glass of water. She clicked over to the local news website. She did this obsessively, searching for updates on Marcus Chen's case. And there it was, a new article. Trial date set for DUI driver in serious crash. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. Marcus Chen's trial would begin April 12, 2021, 5 months away. The article included his lawyer's statement. Mr. Chen has taken full responsibility for his actions. He's completed extensive treatment, maintained sobriety, and demonstrated genuine remorse. We look forward to showing the court that one mistake doesn't define a person's entire character. One mistake. One mistake. Sarah made a sound, a guttural, animalistic scream of rage that sounded nothing like her old voice. Maria came running from the kitchen. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Sarah pointed at the screen, tears streaming down her face. She tried to speak, to explain, but all that came out was, "Him bad. Him, take." Maria read the article and understood. She knelt beside Sarah's chair and held her hand. "I know, honey. I know it's not fair, but there will be justice. The trial will bring justice." But what was justice? Would Marcus Chen spend years in prison? Would that give Sarah her voice back? Would that let her read bedtime stories again? Would that erase the trauma in her daughter's eyes? Nothing would make this right. Nothing could. At 3:30 p.m., the school bus dropped Emma and Grace at the end of the driveway. Sarah watched from the window as they walked up slowly, their backpacks dragging. They used to skip up that driveway, racing each other. Not anymore. They came inside quietly. "Hi, Mama," Emma said softly, kissing Sarah's cheek. Grace climbed into Sarah's lap without saying anything, just needing to be held. "How's school?" Sarah managed. "Fine," Emma lied. Sarah knew she was being bullied. She'd seen the notes from the school counselor. Kids were cruel. They'd heard about the accident, seen Sarah in her wheelchair at pickup. They called Emma Broke Brain's daughter. Sarah wanted to march into that school and give those kids a piece of her mind. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she couldn't even protect herself anymore. "Homework?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, math and reading." Emma pulled out her worksheets and sat at the kitchen table. Grace stayed in Sarah's lap, sucking her thumb, a habit she'd broken at age 3 but had returned to after the accident. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, fighting back tears. She'd failed them. She was supposed to be the one reading with them, helping with homework, making snacks, asking about their days. Instead, Maria made them apple slices while Sarah sat uselessly, a broken shell of their mother. When David came home at 11:00 p.m. from his second job, he found Sarah still awake, sitting in the dark living room. The girls were asleep. The house was quiet except for the kitchen clock ticking. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her on the couch. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled. "You okay?" Sarah shook her head. She pulled up the news article on her phone and showed him. David read it, his jaw clenching. "April 12th. Okay, we knew it was coming." "I want talk," Sarah struggled to say, "at trial talk." David's eyes widened. "You want to give a victim impact statement?" Sarah nodded firmly. "Sarah, honey, I mean, we can submit a written statement. I can read it for you. You don't have to." "No," the word came out forceful, clear. I talk." David looked at his wife, this fierce, determined woman trapped in a body that wouldn't cooperate. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, we'll tell the prosecutor you'll speak." Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, and for the first time in months, she felt something besides despair. She felt purpose. Marcus Chen had stolen her voice, but in that courtroom, somehow, she would take it back. Even if it killed her to do it. April 12, 2021. The Franklin County Court of Common Pleas buzzed with tension as spectators filed into Courtroom 6C. Sarah Mitchell sat in her wheelchair in the third row, David beside her, both dressed in somber clothing. Sarah wore a simple navy dress, the one she'd worn to parent-teacher conferences that night, now loose on her frame after losing 30 pounds. David held her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. Behind them sat Sarah's former teaching colleagues, 23 strong, all wearing purple ribbons, Sarah's favorite color. Her principal, Dr. Margaret Chen, no relation to Marcus, had organized the support. "Teachers take care of their own," she told David. Across the aisle sat Marcus Chen's family. His mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. His father, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit, stared straight ahead with his jaw set. Marcus's younger sister couldn't stop glancing nervously at Sarah. At exactly 9:00 a.m. the bailiff called out, "All rise," the Honorable Patricia Brennan presiding. Judge Brennan entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been on the bench for 18 years and had a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for nonsense. "Please be seated. We are here for the matter of the state of Ohio versus Marcus Andrew Chen. Will the defendant please rise?" Marcus stood, flanked by his attorney Jonathan Reeves. He wore a charcoal gray suit perfectly tailored, his hair neatly trimmed. He looked like a model defendant, respectful, remorseful, reformed. Sarah's stomach churned. Judge Brennan reviewed the charges. "Mr. Chen, you are charged with 1 count of aggravated vehicular assault, a degree felony, and 1 count of operating a vehicle under the influence, a first-degree misdemeanor. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." Marcus's voice was steady, practiced. Sarah made a small sound, a whimper of disbelief. David squeezed her hand. They'd known he'd plead not guilty. Reeves was going for jury sympathy, banking on Marcus's clean record and rehabilitation. Jury selection took all morning. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, was a 38-year-old former public defender who'd switched sides after her own sister was killed by a drunk driver. She was relentless, passionate, and known for making juries cry. She wore minimal makeup and a simple black suit. She wanted the focus on the evidence, not her. By 2:00 p.m. they had their jury. 8 women, 4 men, ranging from a 23-year-old college student to a 67-year-old retired factory worker. Jennifer studied each face carefully. She needed them to see Sarah not as a victim, but as a person, a teacher, a mother, a woman whose entire life had been stolen. Opening statements began at 2:30 p.m. Jennifer Walsh approached the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. On November 15, 2019, Sarah Mitchell was driving home from work. She's a third-grade teacher. That night, she'd stayed late for parent-teacher conferences, because that's what good teachers do. They go above and beyond for their students. She pulled up a photo on the courtroom screen. Sarah in her classroom, surrounded by smiling children, reading a book with animated enthusiasm. This is Sarah Mitchell before November 15, 2019. Vibrant, articulate, living her dream. Jennifer clicked to the next image. Sarah in her hospital bed, unconscious, bandaged, tubes everywhere. Several jurors gasped. This is Sarah Mitchell after Marcus Chen made a choice. Not a mistake, a choice. He chose to drink 6 whiskey doubles at Morton Steakhouse. He chose to take Xanax with that alcohol. He chose to get behind the wheel of his SUV. And he chose to blow through a red light at 55 miles per hour. Jennifer's voice rose. Sarah Mitchell made no choices that night except to drive carefully home to her family, and now she clicked to a recent photo of Sarah struggling with her speech therapist. Now she can't say her own daughter's names, she can't read, she can't teach, she can barely speak. Marcus Chen didn't just hit her car, he stole her voice. He stole her identity, he stole her life. The courtroom was dead silent. Over the next few days, you'll see the evidence. Surveillance footage, toxicology reports, expert testimony, and you'll hear from Sarah herself. What Marcus Chen did wasn't an accident, it was vehicular assault, and it's time for him to be held accountable. Jennifer sat down. Several jurors were already tearing up. Jonathan Reeves stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Where Jennifer was fire, he was water, smooth, calming, reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to Sarah Mitchell is a tragedy. There's no disputing that. My heart breaks for her and her family. He gestured towards Sarah with what looked like genuine sympathy. But this case isn't about whether a tragedy occurred. It's about whether Marcus Chen is a criminal. He walked closer to the jury. Marcus Chen is 28 years old. Before November 15, 2019, he had never even gotten a speeding ticket. He's a college graduate, a successful professional, a son, a brother. He made one terrible error in judgment, one night when he thought he was okay to drive and he wasn't. Reeves pulled up Marcus's photo from a volunteer event. Since the accident, Marcus has taken full responsibility. He immediately enrolled in intensive alcohol treatment. He attends AA meetings twice a week. He volunteers at a youth center, teaching kids about the dangers of drinking and driving. He has not touched alcohol in 17 months. Sarah felt rage building in her chest. Responsibility. He'd pled not guilty. The prosecution wants you to see Marcus as a monster. But monsters don't spend their weekends counseling troubled teens. Monsters don't complete 200 hours of community service voluntarily. Marcus Chen made a mistake that he will regret for the rest of his life. But our justice system is about rehabilitation, not revenge. Thank you. As Reeves sat down, Sarah caught Marcus glancing her way. Their eyes met for a split second. He quickly looked away, but not before Sarah saw something in his expression. Was it guilt? Or was it just fear of consequences? Day 2. Jennifer Walsh called her first witness, Officer Brad Morrison, first responder to the scene. "Describe what you saw when you arrived," Jennifer prompted. Morrison, a 15-year veteran, looked uncomfortable. The victim's vehicle was completely destroyed on the driver's side. "I've worked hundreds of accidents, and I thought this one would be a fatality." Ms. Mitchell was unconscious, significant bleeding from the head. The defendant was standing outside his vehicle, packing on his cell phone. "Did you speak with Mr. Chen?" "Yes, ma'am. I smelled alcohol immediately. His speech was slurred. He couldn't walk a straight line. When I asked if he'd been drinking, he said, and I quote, 'Just a couple beers with dinner, officer.'" Jennifer pulled up Marcus's credit card receipt. "Just a couple beers. Officer, what does this receipt show?" 6 whiskey drinks, Jack Daniels neat, total alcohol bill of $84. "Did Mr. Chen mention whiskey to you?" "No, ma'am, he lied." The jury shifted in their seats, several taking notes. Next came Detective Ray Martinez, who walked the jury through the surveillance footage frame by frame. The video was damning. Marcus's SUV never even tapped the brakes. He hit Sarah's car with such force that her vehicle spun 180 degrees. The light had been red for 3.7 seconds when Mr. Chen entered the intersection, Martinez testified. At his speed, he would have needed to brake at least 200 feet back. He never attempted to stop. Then came Dr. Michael Rawlings, Sarah's neurosurgeon. "I performed an emergency craniotomy on Ms. Mitchell at 1:30 a.m. The epidural hematoma was massive. Without immediate surgery, she would have died within the hour. The impact caused severe damage to the left temporal lobe, which controls language processing and speech production. This type of injury is typically permanent." "Permanent?" Jennifer repeated for the jury. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell will likely struggle with speech for the rest of her life." Sarah watched Marcus as Dr. Rawlings testified. Marcus stared at the table, his face pale. "Good," Sarah thought. "Listen to what you did." Day 3, Marcus Chen took the stand. Jonathan Reeves led him through his testimony carefully. Marcus spoke clearly, emotionally, hitting every note. "I was celebrating closing a major contract. I had some drinks, more than I realized. I should have called an Uber. I should have waited. I thought I was fine, but I wasn't. I made a terrible, terrible mistake." "Have you had any alcohol since that night?" Reeves asked. "No, sir. Not a drop. I attend AA meetings twice weekly. I've been sober for 17 months and will remain sober for life." "Do you take responsibility for this accident?" "Absolutely." Marcus turned to face Sarah directly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am so sorry. If I could trade places with you, I would. I think about you every single day. I've dedicated my life to making sure this never happens to anyone else. I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have." His eyes glistened with tears. The jury watched him intently. But then Jennifer Walsh stood for cross-examination, and her expression was ice. "Mr. Chen, you said you thought you were fine to drive. But didn't you text your friend at 9:48 p.m.? She held up the phone record. "Dude, I'm so wasted, lol, heading home." Marcus's face went red. That was a joke. I wasn't actually." "You texted, 'I'm so wasted,' 3 minutes before you nearly killed Sarah Mitchell, and that was a joke." "I didn't mean." "You told Officer Morrison you had a couple beers. That was a lie, wasn't it?" "I was confused." "Your blood alcohol was .12. You knew you were drunk. You just didn't care." "That's not true." Jennifer's voice cut like a blade. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. But on November 15th, 2019, you weren't sorry enough to call a cab." Marcus had no answer. Sarah watched him crumble on the stand, and she felt no pity. Only fury. Tomorrow, it would be her turn to speak. April 15th, 2021, Day 4 of the trial. Sarah Mitchell barely slept the night before. She'd spent hours with Dr. Linda Pearson practicing what she wanted to say. They'd written a full statement, 2 pages of everything Sarah felt, everything she'd lost, everything Marcus Chen had stolen. David would read it if she couldn't. But Sarah was determined to speak for herself. At 6:00 a.m., she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gripping the sink, trying to form words. "My name, Sarah," it came out garbled, slurred. She tried again. "I am teacher." Worse. Tears of frustration filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She would do this. She had to. David found her there an hour later, still practicing, her face red with effort. "Sarah, honey, you don't have to put yourself through this. I can read the statement. No one expects." "I do," Sarah interrupted, the words thick but clear enough. "My words." David's eyes filled with tears. He hugged her tightly. "Okay, your words. I'll be right there with you." The courtroom was packed. Word had spread that Sarah Mitchell would testify today. Local news crews lined the hallway outside. Judge Brennan had allowed cameras in the courtroom for this portion of the trial. She wanted the public to see the real cost of drunk driving. At 10:00 a.m., Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh stood. "Your Honor, the state calls Sarah Mitchell." The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to Sarah as David wheeled her down the center aisle. The wheels squeaked softly on the polished floor. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap, clutching the written statement she'd prepared. Marcus Chen sat rigid at the defense table, his face pale. His attorney had coached him. "Show respect. Don't look away. This will be difficult, but the jury is watching your reaction." David positioned Sarah's wheelchair directly in front of the judge's bench, facing the jury. Sarah could see all 12 faces, some sympathetic, some curious, all intensely focused. To her right sat Marcus, less than 10 feet away. She could hear him breathing. Judge Brennan leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult. You may give your victim impact statement whenever you're ready. If at any point you need a break, just let me know." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. David stood beside her, ready to take the written statement if needed. Jennifer Walsh approached. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you like your husband to read your statement?" Sarah looked at the papers in her lap, 2 pages of carefully crafted sentences that David had helped her write. Words about her life before, about Emma and Grace, about the medical bills, the therapy, the endless frustration. Important words, true words. But they weren't her words. Not really. They were words she dictated to David, words he'd polished and organized. And suddenly, sitting in this courtroom, facing the man who'd done this to her, Sarah realized that those prepared words weren't enough. She needed Marcus Chen, and everyone in this room, to understand what he'd actually taken from her. Sarah shook her head. She pushed the papers away. David leaned down, whispering urgently, "Sarah, we practiced this. I can read it for you. You don't have to." "No," the word came out clear and firm. Sarah looked up at her husband with fierce determination. I talk." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. The jurors sat up straighter. Marcus Chen's hands clenched together on the table. Judge Brennan studied Sarah carefully. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you certain? There's no shame in having your statement read. We all understand the challenges you're facing." Sarah turned to face the judge and nodded emphatically. She reached up and pushed David's hand away gently but firmly. She loved him desperately, but this moment, this one moment, had to be hers alone. David stepped back, tears already streaming down his face. He knew his wife. When Sarah Mitchell set her mind to something, nothing could stop her. Sarah took a deep, shaking breath. The courtroom was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking on the wall. 150 people held their breath, waiting. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat had locked up, her tongue refusing to cooperate. Panic flashed through her eyes. "Come on," she told herself. "You can do this. Say something, anything." She tried again, forcing air through her vocal cords. A small sound emerged, strangled, barely human. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Marcus Chen looked down at his hands, his jaw working, his eyes squeezed shut. Sarah's face contorted with effort. Veins stood out on her neck. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her hands gripped the wheelchair arms so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. 30 seconds passed, 45, a full minute. Some jurors began wiping their eyes, moved by the sheer struggle playing out before them. Dr. Linda Pearson, sitting in the gallery, silently mouthed encouragement. "You can do this. You can do this." Sarah thought about everything that had been stolen from her, reading bedtime stories to Emma and Grace, teaching her students, singing along to the radio, having a simple conversation with her husband, saying, "I love you" without it sounding like gibberish. Her entire identity gone, because Marcus Chen couldn't be bothered to call an Uber. The rage and grief and desperation channeled into her vocal cords. She felt something shift, unlock. Her mouth formed the shape. The sound began in her diaphragm, pushed up through her throat, shaped by her damaged brain into something recognizable. "My." The word hung in the air, slurred, strained, but unmistakably a word. The courtroom leaned forward collectively. Sarah paused, gathering every ounce of strength she possessed. She looked directly at Marcus Chen, her eyes burning with intensity. And then, louder, clearer, with devastating precision, she spoke. And voice. 2 words, my voice. And they landed like a nuclear bomb. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, sacred. It was the silence of 150 people suddenly understanding, truly, viscerally understanding, what had been taken from this woman. Not her mobility, not her health, not her career. Her voice, her ability to be heard, her capacity to exist as herself in the world. Marcus Chen's composure shattered. His face crumpled and a sob escaped his throat. His shoulders shook as he buried his face in his hands. His mother in the gallery let out a wail of anguish. The jury was openly weeping. Juror number 7, a middle-aged mother of 3, had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Juror number 3, the retired factory worker, removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. Judge Brennan took off her own glasses, her professional composure cracking as she pressed her fingers to her eyes. David stood behind Sarah's wheelchair, both hands on her shoulders, his entire body shaking with sobs. Jennifer Walsh stood frozen, tears running freely down her face. Even Jonathan Reeves, the defense attorney paid to defend Marcus Chen, looked stricken, his carefully neutral expression replaced by raw emotion. Sarah wasn't finished. She took another trembling breath, her face still contorted with effort, and repeated the words, this time even louder with even more force. My voice. The sound echoed through the courtroom, through the hearts of everyone present. Those 2 words contained everything. The agony of 17 months of silence, the rage at injustice, the grief for what was lost, the determination to be heard despite everything. Sarah's arms dropped to her lap. She slumped in her wheelchair, completely spent, her face wet with tears and sweat. She had nothing left to give, but she'd said what she needed to say. David immediately moved to her side, kneeling beside the wheelchair, holding her as she collapsed against him. Judge Brennan cleared her throat, struggling to maintain composure. The court will take a 15-minute recess. She banged the gavel, but her hand was shaking. As people filed out of the courtroom, many couldn't make it more than a few steps before breaking down completely. Sarah's teaching colleagues hugged each other in the hallway, crying. The court reporter, a woman who'd transcribed thousands of testimonies, sat at her machine with tears dripping onto the keys. In the courtroom, Marcus Chen remained at the defense table, his head in his hands, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed image of the remorseful but deserving of mercy defendant completely destroyed. Because Sarah Mitchell hadn't needed 2 pages of prepared statements. She'd needed only 2 words. And those 2 words had said absolutely everything. When court reconvened after the 15-minute recess, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The jury box, which had started the trial with neutral, assessing faces, now looked at Marcus Chen with undisguised contempt. Even the bailiff, a stoic man who'd worked hundreds of cases, stood a little straighter, his eyes harder when they landed on the defendant. Sarah had been wheeled to the side of the courtroom, David beside her with a cup of water and tissues. Her face was still flushed from the effort of speaking, but there was something different in her expression now, a kind of fierce peace. She'd been heard. Finally, after 17 months of silence, she'd been heard. Judge Brennan looked at Sarah with profound respect. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for your testimony. Would you like your husband to read the remainder of your statement?" Sarah nodded, exhausted but grateful. David stood, unfolding the written statement with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he began to read what Sarah had painstakingly dictated over dozens of sessions. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 35 years old, though I feel ancient now. Before November 15, 2019, I was a third-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary School. I loved my job more than anything except my family. Every morning, I woke up excited to teach children to read, to watch their faces light up when they finally understood a concept, to be part of their growth." David paused, composing himself. Several jurors were crying again. "Now I wake up every morning and cry because I can't remember the word for coffee. I can't help my 7-year-old daughter with her reading homework, me, a reading teacher. I can't sing my 5-year-old her favorite lullaby. When they ask me questions, I can't answer them. They've started asking their father everything because it's too painful to watch me struggle." Marcus Chen had his head bowed, his attorney's hand on his shoulder. "My medical bills exceed $480,000. My husband works 2 jobs, 16 hours a day, to keep us afloat. We've drained our savings, borrowed from family, and we're still drowning. But the money isn't even what hurts most. What hurts is watching my daughters grow up with a mother who's a shell of who she was. What hurts is seeing my husband age 10 years in 17 months. What hurts is looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself." David's voice grew stronger, channeling Sarah's pain into words. Marcus Chen chose to drink 6 whiskey drinks. He chose to take Xanax with that alcohol. He chose to get behind the wheel. He chose to drive 55 in a 35 zone. And when he saw that red light, he chose not to stop. Every single choice was his. I made no choices except to drive home to my family. And now I live with his choices every single day for the rest of my life." David looked up from the paper, directly at Marcus. "She wants the court to know that she doesn't hate you, Mr. Chen, but she needs you to understand that sorry doesn't give her back her voice. Treatment programs don't erase the brain damage. Community service doesn't let her read to her children again. Nothing you do will ever make this right." David folded the paper and returned to Sarah's side. The courtroom was silent except for muffled sobbing. Closing arguments began that afternoon. Jennifer Walsh stood before the jury, her voice controlled but passionate. "Sarah Mitchell's 2 words, my voice, told you everything you need to know about this case. Marcus Chen didn't just cause a car accident. He stole a woman's identity, her career, her ability to communicate with her own children. And why? Because he was too arrogant, too selfish, too drunk to make the right choice." She pointed at Marcus. "The defense wants you to believe this was a mistake. But a mistake is grabbing the wrong coffee order. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. Getting behind the wheel after 6 whiskey drinks and Xanax isn't a mistake, it's a crime. It's aggravated vehicular assault. And it's time for Marcus Chen to face real consequences." Jonathan Reeves gave his closing argument, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made a terrible error in judgment. He's expressed genuine remorse. He's changed his life. Our justice system is supposed to rehabilitate, not just punish. Marcus Chen is not a career criminal. He's a young man who made one catastrophic decision and has spent every day since trying to atone for it. But the jury's faces were stone. Sarah's testimony had changed everything. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 43 minutes. Sarah and David waited in a victim services room, holding hands, unable to speak. So much of their lives had been about waiting for Sarah to wake from the coma, waiting for test results, waiting for therapy to work, waiting for this trial. At 4:17 p.m., the bailiff knocked on the door. They have a verdict. Sarah's heart hammered as David wheeled her back into the courtroom. Marcus Chen stood between his attorneys, his face ashen. His mother clutched a rosary in the gallery. His father's expression was unreadable. Judge Brennan addressed the jury foreman, a 52-year-old accountant named Robert Zhang. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of aggravated vehicular assault, how do you find the defendant? Guilty, Your Honor. Marcus's knees buckled. His attorney caught him. His mother let out a cry of despair. On the charge of operating a vehicle under the influence. Guilty. Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. David buried his face in his hands. Behind them, Sarah's teaching colleagues erupted in quiet sobs of relief. Judge Brennan banged her gavel. Order, Mr. Chen, sentencing will be held on May 3rd. You are remanded to custody until that time. Bailiff, please take the defendant into custody. As handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he turned to look at Sarah one last time. His face was destroyed, red, swollen, defeated. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Sarah looked directly at him and slowly, deliberately shook her head. Sorry wasn't enough. It would never be enough. May 3, 2021. Sentencing day. Marcus Chen stood before Judge Brennan in an orange jumpsuit, having spent the last 2 weeks in county jail. The cocky pharmaceutical sales rep was gone. This man looked broken, hollow. Judge Brennan reviewed the pre-sentencing report, her face grave. Mr. Chen, I've presided over criminal cases for 18 years. I've seen drunk driving cases where defendants show genuine remorse. I've seen people who truly understand the gravity of their actions. But I've also seen people who are sorry they got caught, not sorry for what they did. She looked at him directly. Your actions on November 15, 2019 were not a mistake. They were a series of deliberate choices that demonstrated a reckless disregard for human life. You knew you were intoxicated. You texted your friend about being so wasted. You got behind the wheel anyway, and you nearly killed an innocent woman. Marcus stood with his head bowed, tears dripping onto his orange jumpsuit. Mrs. Mitchell spoke 2 words that will stay with me forever. My voice. You took that from her. You took her career, her independence, her ability to be the mother she was. No sentence I impose can restore what you destroyed. Judge Brennan paused, letting the weight settle. On the charge of aggravated vehicular assault, I sentence you to the maximum, 8 years in the Ohio Department of Corrections. On the charge of operating a vehicle under the influence, I sentence you to 12 months, to be served concurrently. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $750,000 to Mrs. Mitchell for medical expenses and ongoing care. Your driver's license is permanently revoked. You will never drive again. Marcus's legs gave out. His attorney caught him as he collapsed. Furthermore, Judge Brennan continued, I am recommending you serve your full sentence without the possibility of early parole. Perhaps in 8 years, you will truly understand what you took from Sarah Mitchell. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck with finality. Outside the courthouse, news cameras swarmed. Someone had recorded Sarah's 2-word testimony on their phone. Within hours, the video went viral. By the next morning, my voice was trending on Twitter. News outlets from CNN to BBC played the clip. Mothers Against Drunk Driving made it the centerpiece of their national campaign. Sarah Mitchell's 2 words had reached millions. And Marcus Chen's name became synonymous with the devastating consequences of drunk driving. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, had been served 3 years later, April 2024. Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., practicing the speech she'd give later that day. Her reflection showed a woman who'd aged beyond her years, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, gray streaks in her dark hair. But there was something else too: strength, purpose, survival. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said slowly, carefully enunciating each word. The sounds came out thick, slightly slurred but comprehensible. 3 years ago she couldn't have managed it. Now, with immense effort and concentration, she could string together sentences. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough. David appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're going to be great today," he said, kissing her forehead. "The kids at Hamilton High School need to hear your story." Sarah smiled. A real smile, something that had taken months of physical therapy to achieve properly again. She'd regained about 70% of her speech capability, thanks to experimental treatments and intensive therapy that never would have been possible without the viral video. That video, 2 words that changed everything. Within 48 hours of the trial, someone's cell phone recording of Sarah's testimony had hit 40 million views. News outlets worldwide picked it up: CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. My Voice became a rallying cry for drunk driving prevention. Mothers Against Drunk Driving featured Sarah in their national campaign. Students Against Destructive Decisions invited her to speak at their conference. And the donations poured in. A GoFundMe page created by Sarah's teaching colleagues raised $1.2 million in 3 weeks. The money funded cutting-edge speech therapy technology, experimental treatments her insurance wouldn't cover, and finally gave David the ability to quit his second job. For the first time in 2 years, he was home for dinner. For the first time in 2 years, their family could breathe. But money couldn't buy back what was lost. It could only help Sarah build something new from the ruins. Sarah walked carefully down the hallway of Hamilton High School, David beside her carrying her bag of materials. She no longer needed the wheelchair. Physical therapy had restored her mobility, but her gait was slow, deliberate. Brain injuries affected everything, even balance. Principal Anderson greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you so much for coming. Our students are really looking forward to hearing from you. We have about 300 juniors and seniors in the auditorium." Sarah's stomach clenched with anxiety. 300 teenagers. What if they laughed at how she talked? What if she froze up? What if? David squeezed her hand. "You've got this. You've spoken to 5 schools already. You're amazing at this." Sarah had found her new purpose in the wreckage of her old life. She couldn't teach 3rd grade anymore. That door was permanently closed. But she could teach teenagers something more important than reading and math. She could teach them that choices have consequences. That just this once can destroy lives. That drunk driving isn't just a statistic. It's Sarah Mitchell, unable to say her daughter's names for 17 months. The auditorium fell silent as Sarah walked onto the stage. 300 faces turned toward her, some curious, some bored, some already on their phones. She recognized that look. She'd been a teacher long enough to know when kids thought something would be a waste of their time. But she also knew how to reach them. Sarah stood at the microphone, David beside her with her written speech in case she needed it. But she wouldn't read from notes. She never did. Her story was too visceral, too real to be read. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her words slow and thick. 4 years ago, I was a teacher like some of you want to be. I loved my job. I loved my life." She paused, took a breath, continued. "Then Marcus Chen got drunk. He drank 6 whiskeys. He took pills. He drove anyway, and he hit me." The bored expressions were fading. Students were leaning forward now, listening. Sarah pulled up a photo on the screen behind her, herself before the accident, laughing with her third graders during story time. Vibrant, alive, whole. This was me before, click. The next image showed her in the ICU, bandaged, unconscious, barely alive. Several students gasped. This was me after. For the next 40 minutes, Sarah told her story. She showed them the surveillance footage of the crash. She explained what brain damage meant, how she'd forgotten her own daughter's names, how she'd spent months relearning to say basic words, how she'd lost her career and her identity. And then she showed them the courtroom video, the moment she'd said those two words. My voice, she said along with her past self on the screen. That's what he took, not just my health, my voice, who I was. The auditorium was completely silent now. Several students were crying openly. Marcus Chen is in prison 8 years, but you know what? Prison doesn't give me my voice back. It doesn't let me read bedtime stories right. It doesn't make me again. Sarah looked out at the sea of young faces. These kids who thought they were invincible, who'd go to parties this weekend and maybe drink, maybe get behind the wheel because it's just 5 minutes away, or I'm fine, I only had a few. If you drink and drive, Sarah said slowly, deliberately, you might kill someone, or you might do something worse. You might leave them alive, but broken like me forever. She paused, let that sink in. So promise me, promise, you'll call an Uber, call your parents, sleep on a friend's couch, walk. I don't care, just don't drive, because one choice can destroy everything. When Sarah finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Not polite applause, thunderous, standing ovation applause that went on for 3 full minutes. Students rushed the stage afterward, wanting to hug her, thank her, take photos with her. Several promised through tears that they'd never drink and drive. One girl, maybe 17, approached Sarah with mascara running down her face. My older brother died in a drunk driving accident 2 years ago. The driver got 6 months. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for showing people this is real. Sarah hugged her tight, tears streaming down both their faces. That evening, Sarah sat on the floor of Emma and Grace's room, now 10 and 8 years old. They'd both grown so much. Emma was in 5th grade, Grace in 3rd. The same grade Sarah used to teach, a lifetime ago. Mama, will you read to us? Grace asked, handing Sarah Charlotte's Web, the book Sarah had been reading to her class the week before the accident. Sarah's heart swelled. 3 years ago, this would have been impossible. Now, slowly, haltingly, but unmistakably, she could do it. Chapter 1, Sarah read carefully. Before breakfast, where's Papa going with that axe? Her voice cracked with emotion, but the words came. Emma and Grace curled up on either side of her, listening intently, not caring that Mama read slower than other moms. She was reading. That was enough. David stood in the doorway, recording on his phone, tears streaming down his face. Later that night, he'd post it to social media with the caption, 4 years ago, my wife couldn't say our daughters' names. Tonight, she read them a bedtime story. Never give up hope. The video would get 15 million views. Sarah Mitchell's story wasn't over. It was evolving. Meanwhile, 180 miles away at Madison Correctional Institution, Marcus Chen sat in his cell, staring at a letter he'd written and rewritten 15 times. He'd been incarcerated for 3 years now, with 5 more to go. The cocky pharmaceutical rep was long gone. Prison had a way of stripping away everything false. Marcus had spent 3 years attending every counseling session, every addiction program, every opportunity for rehabilitation. He taught basic literacy to other inmates. He answered letters from students who'd seen Sarah's talks and wanted to understand how someone could make such a devastating choice. His letter to Sarah read simply, Mrs. Mitchell, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that your 2 words, my voice, haunt me every single day. They should. I stole something irreplaceable from you, and no amount of time in here will ever balance that scale. I've dedicated what's left of my life to making sure no one else makes my choice. When I get out, I'll spend every day speaking to kids about what I did and what it cost. Not to redeem myself. I can't. But because maybe, I can stop one person from destroying someone the way I destroyed you. I'm sorry will never be enough, but I'm so sorry. Marcus Chen. He mailed it knowing Sarah might throw it away unread. He didn't blame her, but he'd sent 14 letters over 3 years and he'd keep sending them. Not for forgiveness. He didn't deserve that, but for accountability, for witness, for the permanent record that he knew exactly what he'd done. 5 years later, in 2029, Marcus Chen was released on parole after serving his full 8-year sentence. He was 36 years old, the same age Sarah had been when he'd hit her. He walked out of Madison Correctional into a world that hadn't forgotten his name. His first call was to mothers against drunk driving. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm the man who nearly killed Sarah Mitchell. I want to volunteer. I want to speak at schools. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure kids understand what I did. They accepted, cautiously, skeptically, but they accepted. Marcus's second call was to a therapist. Prison had given him sobriety. Now he needed to learn how to live with what he'd done. He never tried to contact Sarah directly again. That would be cruel, selfish. But he followed her advocacy work from a distance, her speeches, her viral videos, her appearances on national news. She'd turned her tragedy into purpose. The least he could do was spend his life trying to prevent others from creating more tragedies. 10 years after the accident, November 15, 2029, Sarah stood at the entrance of Riverside Elementary School, her old school. Principal Chen had retired. A younger woman named Principal Harris greeted her now. Mrs. Mitchell, the students are so excited. They've been asking about you all week. Sarah's former 3rd graders were now in 8th grade, 13 and 14 years old, on the cusp of high school. They'd invited Sarah back for a special assembly about perseverance and overcoming challenges. When Sarah walked into the auditorium, the entire student body erupted in applause. And there, in the front row, sat Tommy, Marcus, Anya, and the rest of her former students, now teenagers, holding a banner that read, "You're still the best teacher ever." Tommy, now taller than Sarah, his voice deep, stood up. "Mrs. Mitchell, we wanted to thank you. You taught us to read, but you also taught us something more important. You taught us that no matter what happens, we can find our voice. You found yours, and you've helped so many people find theirs too." Sarah stood before these kids she'd taught to sound out words, to write their names, to love stories. And now they were teaching her about resilience, about love, about how impact never truly ends. "Thank you," Sarah said, her words still slow but clear. "You'll always be my students, my kids, and I'm so proud of all of you." As she looked out at their faces, some crying, all smiling, Sarah realized something profound. Marcus Chen had stolen her voice, but she'd built a new one. Different, imperfect, hard one. But hers. And it would be heard. Not just in courtrooms or high school auditoriums, but in every life she touched, every teenager who chose not to drink and drive because they remembered her story, every family spared the nightmare hers had endured. Her voice was different now, slower, harder to understand. But it was louder than it had ever been. And it would never, ever be silenced again. The end.